Welcome back to Gamma 20. We're taking a stroll down through the book of Genesis, why the beginning matters. Today is study 19, Jacob and the unfolding of God's plan, Genesis 26 to 28. We're focusing on the life of Jacob, this second last patriarch of which the covenant is passed down to, and how his life unfolds. Right? So let's start with a word of prayer. Father, we ask this day that you show us through the life of Jacob how your plans unfold in a person's life. We ask for Jesus' sake. Amen. Right. Genesis 26 is basically about the covenant being passed on. Isaac's journey of faith parallels that of his father. There's a famine in the land, and he went to Abimelech's land, the same place, and then he told a lie, just like his father. My wife is my sister, and this case is an absolute lie, not even half sister. Isaac lied about Rebekah, and however, God intervened, and Abimelech had to give him a lot of money in return, Isaac's prosperity, and the covenant is renewed, and he actually has a covenant or treaty with Abimelech. And this is the covenant renewal. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servant dug a well. So here's a covenant renewal. Same covenant God gave to Abraham, God passed on to his son Isaac. And he built an altar. And a lot of people are confused. They thought altars should be broken down. This is not an idol altar to an idol. This is before the Exodus, where the tabernacle was instructed by God to be built, and later on God instructed David about the temple. Before that, all of the worship of Yahweh goes via altars. All right, so therefore this altar is not an altar about idols, but an altar to God. Now, after that's been done, then we're talking about the blessing that passes on from Isaac down to the next part of the generation, Isaac 27. We remember, if you go back to Genesis 25, where the two twins are struggling within the uterus of the mother Rebekah, is basically symbolic of the two nations within her wombs, right? Esau will lead one and Jacob will lead the other, and it will be the younger who will be dominant over the older. This is a prophecy given to him, right? And actually, Esau rejected the covenant. Why? Because Esau despised his birthright, didn't think it was worth anything, and he sold his birthright for a bowl of soup and bread. All right, so that's human responsibility. Esau can't turn around and say, look, right inside the womb, God said the older shall serve the younger, so therefore my birthright was actually taken from me in the womb. It wasn't taken. This is a prophecy. But human responsibility wound up that Esau was a kind of person whom God knew would despise his birthright. Now, how did the parents respond to the prophecy? Because this is an example of a dysfunctional family in how they respond. They knew this is what was going to happen, and this is what was happening. And Esau was ungodly. He didn't care about the birthright. He sold it. He didn't care about living a life walking with God. So he took Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. They didn't care that they were going to be living a life following Yahweh and living a different manner of life and not be contaminated with the women of that particular culture around him. He made decisions not aligned with the call. And here was the dysfunctional family. On Rebekah's side, favoritism. She obviously favored the younger son. She conspired to defraud Esau. She was in on the plot to cheat the elder son by by tricking the husband. On the other hand, Isaac, he ran the primogeniture ceremony, the passing of the blessing, in secret, not in front of everybody else as it usually is. He's blind to his older son's unholiness. He just admired him for his hunting prowess, his strength. He knew of Esau that he actually sold his birthright already. And yet he went against this, and he went against the prophecy. So right? So what happens was, we know, you can read in the particular chapter, Jacob disguised himself as Esau, hairy, put a wool over his body, and Isaac was tricked, and he actually received some meat, for he thought it was Jacob who actually was Esau who actually hunted and got the meat, and he ate it, was happy, and he gave the blessing instead to Jacob, when he actually thought it would be Esau. He put his hand on, or he thought this is Esau, he gave the blessing. Actually turned out that he gave it to the wrong person. He meant it for Esau, but it turned out to be Jacob. And this is the blessing. May God give you the dew of this heaven, the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and the nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. May your mother's son bow down before you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. So this is just like the Abrahamic covenant, passed down from father to son, from Isaac to, apparently, is passing to Esau, but actually turned out passed to Jacob. This is a line. The nature of blessing, people ask, what kind of nature of this blessing? Actually, it's basically like a legal last will and testament. It's done with great spiritual discernment. It's affirmation and empowerment of the particular son, passing all the blessing to him. And it's partly also a prophecy, right? So, and this blessing is an act of faith, because in Hebrews 11 it says, by faith, Isaac invoked future blessing on Jacob and Esau, Jacob first. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made a mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. So therefore, it is not uncommon that at the end of their lives, they will actually give a blessing as an act of faith of the patriarch. Now here, we can see in play God's sovereign choice. Isaac instead of Ishmael, Jacob instead of Esau, Judah over his 3 older brothers, David instead of his 7 older brothers, Jephthah, who is actually illegitimate son, Gideon, the younger son. All right. So then when Isaac found out that he had blessed the wrong son, he trembled very violent and said, who is it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I makan now before you came, and I have blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. See, Isaac had an allergic reaction, very violent. He trembled. There was fear. Why did he do that? Because he feared, because his own scheme actually was a scheme against the prophecy. He knew about the prophecy, and he went against prophecy, and how God turned the tables on him showed him that he was actually fighting God. So therefore he trembled. And he didn't reverse it, because he knows. He stops fighting God. He accepts God's grace over Jacob. And basically, here is Isaac, who fulfilled God's prophecy, God's will, by his own unintentional choice. Imagine. He conspired himself. He wanted to have this ceremony and pass the blessing to his elder son, and turned out to be tricked and passed it to the younger son, and he saw God's hand in it. That's why he trembled. Right? And he realizes God's covenant is with Jacob. God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful. You may become a company of peoples. May He give the blessing of Abraham. You see that? Genesis 12. Blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring, that you may take possession of the land of the sojournings that God gave to Abraham. He understood this. All right? He cannot fight it. And he now freely dispenses it to Jacob. And you can see the interplay between divine sovereignty and free will. The same thing happened to his son Joseph later on. All right? Jacob's son Joseph later on, you can find that they actually threw him into a hole, sold him off to traders, went down to Egypt. He was in prison. And God used that suffering, used that in order to raise him up to be the prime minister of Egypt, and then he used that to save the whole family from famine in the end. And the last, Genesis chapter 50 verse 20 says, for you meant it for evil against me, which is directed against the brothers. They had, of their own free will, tried to destroy him. But God used the same action for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. All right, so Isaac meant it to give the blessing to Esau, but God used his own free will to give the blessing to Jacob. So here you can see a divine sovereignty interplays with free will. God will somehow achieve his purposes, but he achieves his purposes using our own free choices, and they both coalesce into one. Esau asked for a blessing retraction, but instead he gets this: behold, the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of the heavens on high. By your sword you will live, you will serve your brother. When you grow restless, you will break his yoke from your neck. So therefore he will live by the sword. He will be independent one day after a period of service, right? So let's look at human free will and responsibility, the consequences of defeat. You see, the end does not justify the means. Here you've got, because of what has happened, because of the way in which Jacob obtained the blessing in deceit. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. Yes, the prophecy meant that the blessing would be for Jacob. But Jacob took matters into his own hands, showing us that the ends does not justify the means. You cannot achieve God's purposes by irresponsible means. And so therefore, anger, murderous hatred is sowed into this family. There's a rift between mother and son. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there. And that as he blessed him, he directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women, which Esau had. And then Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Paddan Aram. You see, Jacob obeyed father and mother. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women which he had married before did not please Isaac the father, he went to Ishmael, took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalat, and the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Which means, he realigned himself, but because he loved his father. No mention of the mother as well. There's a rift there. And as far as the consequences for Rebekah, is her favorite son in exile, off to run away to save his life, right? But the words of Esau, the older son, were told to Rebekah. She sent and called Jacob, the younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. So therefore, sent the younger son into exile because of the threat of murder, and she would never again see her younger favorite son. There are consequences to the deceit and the scheme of which Rebekah had participated in, right? As for Jacob himself, he stole the birthright. He knew the birthright was Esau's, but yet he used Esau's weaknesses and greed to take that birthright and blessing, and he suffered exile for over 20 years and suffering, which is a consequence of his deceit, because if he didn't deceive his father and his brother, he wouldn't have wound up that way. But in the end, this exile and suffering molded his character. All right, and so here you actually have Jacob later on marrying Rachel, Leah, and then having concubines, and these are the 12 tribes of Israel, all right, in his family. The lessons learned. There's a sovereignty of God, and that God is sovereign even over sin. And if you look in real life, Jesus dresses up as us, took upon himself the sin, and instead got our curse so that we believe in him, we get the firstborn blessing. A beautiful way in which Tim Keller actually cast this. He takes upon ourselves the sin, and we get his blessing, and he gets our curse. Right, so Genesis chapter 28 is where we will end. It's Jacob's dream from deception to destiny. In this particular chapter, there are three things that I want to bring out. Firstly, God comes to us when we are at our lowest point. God's blessing and God's promises are inseparable, and God's transformation enables us to receive His blessings. Firstly, God comes to us when we're at the lowest. So Jacob left Beersheba, went towards Haran, right up north. He came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it on his head and he lay down in that place to sleep. So he heads up north. Totally desolate place, no pillows, no hotels, under the stars, in the middle of nowhere. And he must be wondering, is this blessing real? Because if it's real, I've got nothing here. I've only, not even a pillow, it's a stone. Did I play my cards correct? Was I right in doing what I did? Was there another way? And is suffering only for bad people? I am a bad person. Am I suffering because I'm totally alone? I'm totally vulnerable. And this is the same situation many people find themselves. Job at the bottom of his life, having lost everything, including his health. Joseph in jail. Man born blind, living in a world of darkness. It is right at this particular moment where we suffer, where sometimes God speaks to us. Right? Suffering shows up where our treasure lies. Psalm 39:11. When you discipline a man with rebukes for sin, you consume him like a moth. What is dear to him, like all mankind, is a mere breath. When suffering comes, it is suffering because God is actually eating away like a moth on all the things that are dear to you. Because it cannot be suffering if it's the moth is eating somebody else's clothes. When it's eating your clothes, where something's important to you, that's where suffering occurs, and suffering shows up where our treasure lies. And for Jacob, his treasure lies in the blessing. And right in the middle of in this travels, in the middle of nowhere, he's got nothing. He's a man reduced to nothing, where he was set to inherit everything. All right? So, how Satan assaults the glory of God in lives is either a pleasure or pain. When we actually have pain, we believe God is powerless, God doesn't love us, and that's probably what Jacob is thinking. When we have pleasure and doing well, we think God is unnecessary. So we need to be careful of the two P's in our lives, how Satan assaults the glory of God in our lives. So there's a dream. And behold, there was a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of the Lord were ascending and descending on it. So here is a dream. The three features to this dream, first of all, is a ladder. In Hebrew, is actually a ramp or a stairway. All right? In verse 17 says, there is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Jacob actually realizes later on that this is a place where divine presence and mediation has occurred. It's like a portal where you look through into the other world. You remember the story of C.S. Lewis of Narnia? The girl would open the door of the cupboard and she will then be transported into another world. This is exactly what is happening. Similar language for Tower of Babel. And they said, come, let us build ourselves with a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. And verse 12 of chapter 28 Genesis, and he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached to the heavens. So here you actually have similar language where we actually have a portal between heaven and earth. All right? But there's a difference. Here you actually have a peepal tree, where Gautama Buddha, years and years ago, was supposed to be meditating under this peepal tree. And once he meditated under this tree for a long time, it suddenly dawned upon him the whole religion and rules of Buddhism. Right? And today there's a huge temple in his honor in that particular place. But it's different. Here is man-made religion. Just like Gautama Buddha, you sit under a peepal tree and you think about it. And here you have to build this whole portal, built by man, established by man, where man seeks to reach up to the heavens, and it is Babel. But man cannot do this. It is not possible. The only way we can reach God is by through divine revelation, where God intervenes and the established contact is established by God. Where God seeks to reach down to earth, God will embrace and renew the world. Only God can do this. So the difference between man-made religion and real faith is divine revelation. Is the only way which we can understand God's purposes in this world. Second one, feature of this dream is angels. They are messengers with royal decree, and they're going up and down, which means it's conducting business between heaven and earth, so that God's purposes will be fulfilled. So therefore the dream, a portal to heaven, and the angels carrying out God's purposes in Jacob's life. And then God's very presence, and behold, the Lord stood above it. Hebrew word is over him. So God stood over him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. Abraham is his grandfather, so God of Abraham, Isaac, which means there is a formula of covenant faithfulness. So therefore, this is a portal in his dream, and the lowest part of his life, God actually came to him. And he says, all these angels going up there, I am achieving my purposes, even though you don't seem to think that I am achieving purposes. You are lying here with a stone as a pillow. You don't have even $1 to your name, and you're totally at the bottom of your life. And God's very presence tells you, I have a plan for you. Right? And here he gives him the covenantal promises. The land in which you lie, I will give to you, and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, and to the north, and to the south. In you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So this is the covenantal promises. I'm with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to the land, for I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised. So you don't have to be afraid. Right now, he's afraid. He could be hunted down by his elder brother, persecuted. He's a fugitive from the law. He's got everything to be afraid. And the important thing, as he lying down there on this hard, uncomfortable stone, he realizes this thing. He realizes that mistakes do not define our limits. Yes, he's made a lot of mistakes, but fear does. And God's grace and God's covenantal faithfulness will banish this fear. Do not be afraid. All right? And we look and compare his grandfather with him. His grandfather was actually at a high point in his life, living in a big city in in the Chaldeans, married, however childless, but still he could have carried on his life. When God came to him and asked him to give all that out to pursue a dream. Jacob, on the other hand, is at the lowest point of his life. Totally unmarried, totally childless, and totally with nothing to his name. No tangible benefit. He's a fugitive. And God visits him, which means God visits us in different points of our lives. It doesn't matter when he visits us, but important thing, when he visits us, he basically is there to transform us. God knows when to intervene. Some of us, he intervenes when we're at the peak of our prosperity. For many of us, however, he comes to us when we're really down and out, and we're in a position where we're open to God's dreams and purposes in our lives. And here you can have God's blessings and promises are actually inseparable. On one hand, they've got Genesis 13, the land is promised, the land and the nation is promised, and the blessing to the nations is promised. And God's blessings are Isaac being born, burial plot being purchased, and now Jacob's families. God's blessings and God's promises are inseparable, and you will see whatever God promised, he will bless. They're one and the same. Now, worship is hearing from God and responding to him. So when Jacob woke from his sleep, he said, surely the Lord is in this place. I didn't know it. He was afraid. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. And this is the gate of heaven. And early in the morning, into a stone that they put under his head and set up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place, the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. So here, the response to the revelation of God is actually worship. There's holy fear. He said, my goodness, this is, where God is. How awesome, how wonderful, how great. So here is the worship that we actually have is always in response to God intervening and responding to God's revelation in our lives, right? So, but Jacob's response, besides worship, is also flawed. It's transactional. If you can see, on one column God and one column Jacob. So here is God's unconditional offer. I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, and to the north. In you, your offspring shall be all the families of the earth. I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back. I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised. Unconditional. There's no conditionality here. Here is Jacob's response. If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I should go and give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then, see that? Then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. I will baya balik 1/10. Very, very big. So Jacob's response is actually conditional, where God's offer is unconditional. Right? Now, Jacob's response is also self-centered. This is how God will use Jacob as a blessing to others. It's a land you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread across to the west, etc. In you, your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. It's talking about blessing giving to others. And Jacob's promise, if God will be with me and give me food and clothing, I will return to my father's house. So Jacob's promises are self-centered and very narrowly circumscribed to his particular interests in life, whilst God's interests transcend international borders and goes beyond your imagination. See, that's the difference between God and us. Whenever we are interacting with God, our immediate horizon is circumscribed to my house, my food, my shelter, my relatives, my church. God's purposes are always much larger than ours, and we need to understand that. All right? So all these, blessing to other people, Jacob ignores. We're only interested is what he will get out of it, which is basically a very transactional faith. Jacob's response is presumptuous and manipulative. See? The God will be my God. I will recognize this place as God's house. I will give you 1/10. It's as if God needs Jacob to give him 1/10. God is begging for the 1/10. God needs Jacob to make him his God. God needs Jacob to recognize Bethel as his house. He doesn't understand who he's dealing with. He's thinking that he can manipulate God. But there's a concept of God called the aseity of God. The aseity of God concept is that God needs nothing. He's totally satisfied in and perfect in and of himself. Jacob doesn't understand the dimensions and magnitude of the magnificence of this God. So therefore, his response is presumptuous and manipulative. This is the kind of God that we all worship before we came to know Christ. This is a Japanese temple, Akasaka, I think we went to at some stage. And very interesting, we go in there, you can actually see blessings. If you pay 500 yen, you will get good health. If you pay 2,000 yen, you will get good health and a cure of illness and long life. If you pay 1,000 yen, you will get traffic safety. If you pay 1,000 yen, you will pass exams. It's as if God needs your money and then you will dispense blessing to you. It's a transactional kind of faith. And our faith is a false kind of faith if it's transactional. But it's very rudimentary. Many of our faith is very rudimentary when it starts. So how do we know we have a very transactional faith? Well, when God disappoints, when anger and disappointment, when it does not go our way. You thought God will protect you, but you ran into an accident, you get very angry because God's supposed to be looking after you, right? Prayer life is dominated by needs. When you find out 90% of what you're praying about is about, like Jacob said, my food, my clothing, going in my house is narrowly circumscribed to your own interest in life. Your commitment is leveraged to fulfill our desires. So if God will do this, then I will do that. Right? Guilt. And if bad things happen, you're wondering if God is punishing you when something happens like that. And then you think that God demands excellence in all things, so therefore you work really hard, as if your work will He actually needs you to do your particular work. When you're doing instead of being, All right, you're offering sacrifices instead of loving Him. All right, when faith becomes a tool to get what you want, and also assumes a transactional faith happens when you assume that you are in a co-equal relationship with God, that God actually needs you to be faithful, needs you to pray. God's waiting the whole day for you to get on your knees to pray, and then it makes His day. See, this is a sign of a transactional faith, that God needs you to come to Gamma, needs you to go under discipleship. All right, that is a very rudimentary kind of faulty faith. And blessings becomes a right. This is Sovereign Grace Church, which is actually responsible for a lot of beautiful modern day worship songs. And one of the chief pastors is Charles Joseph Mahaney. He's a very interesting take in life. He said, whenever anybody asks you how you are, you know what he says? He says, God is, I'm actually better than I deserve. And why does he say that? Because he's saying that it actually puts us into the right frame of mind. Imagine having received 31 years of a great marriage, and then when you got 10 years of cancer that hits you or your wife, then you get very upset. You need to see life with a wide lens view. That I've got 31 years of a good marriage, good health, prosperity, and then I've got 10 years of suffering from cancer, and that 10 years doesn't negate the 31 years. I need to see life in its perspective, and whatever happens to us, God is actually treating us better than we deserve. Better than we deserve. So therefore, whenever anybody asks you next time, how are you? You would say, I'm actually better than I deserve, because it keeps us constantly in an attitude of gratitude, because we deserve nothing. And whatever grace God has given us is actually one thing more than we actually deserve. Years later on, let's go fast forward to Genesis 35. God tells Jacob to go back to the same spot where he gave the dream. Arise and go to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. And Jacob said to his household and to all with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves, change your garments. Let us arise and go to Bethel so that I may make an altar there to the Lord, to the God who answered me on the day of my distress and become with me and be with me wherever I've gone. So here is a final transformation, where he recognizes that on the day this thing happened, I was the lowest part of my life. God came in. I was a con man. I was a terrible person, but God came in and He changed my life from that day onwards. See, Bethel, that shrine, is about transformation. It's about a place, when a place becomes a shrine, the stone becomes an altar, when the fugitive becomes a pilgrim, when the pilgrim becomes a patriarch becomes a nation, and the nation becomes the kingdom of God. We all have Bethels in our lives, but Bethel is about transformation. The challenge for us is to make Jacob's dream our reality. If you go back to John chapter 1, this same dream is described when Jesus said to Nathanael, truly I say to you, you will see the heavens open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Remember the whole dream? You've got the ramp between heaven and earth, God standing over him, and angels going up and down on this ramp. Now, Jesus is saying, same dream. The difference is this ramp is now myself, Jesus, the Son of God. And so what he's saying, that this heavenly portal that joins earth and heaven is not like the cupboard of Narnia, it's actually the cross. It is through the cross where we make a connection to God, not because we have looked at Him and we meditated under peepal tree like Buddha did, but it's because God comes to us and stands over us in the person of His Son. Here you actually have Bethel, the house of God. Years later on, Jeroboam, the king, actually built an altar here to false gods and idols. It was a terrible place of idolatry. Instead of a place of worship, God became a place of idolatry. And the prophet Amos, Hosea, they all condemned it, right? And Hosea actually called, instead of Bethel, it becomes Bethaven, the house of nothing, right? And it was actually destroyed by King Josiah, and it's written in 2 Kings 23:15. All right. Here is Harriet Tubman, a very famous American Negro slave who escaped. And not only satisfied with escaping, she actually used her time, her talents and all that to gather a whole underground railway network to save slaves. And all this is based on this dream that God had given her to be a blessing to others. And she says, every dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within yourself the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. But Tubman always said that she's not human dreams. It's the fact that she would listen very carefully to the voice of God as she led slaves north. And she only go where she felt God was leading her. For her, her dreams would be to honor God by saving fellow slaves. Here's another lady, Whitney Houston, who also had a dream. In fact, when she was born, she had all the elements to fulfill her dream in place. Her mother was a famous gospel singer called Cissy Houston. Her grandmother was the famous Aretha Franklin, and her cousin was Dionne Warwick. All the ingredients for a successful dream. And she dreamt of being a gospel singer, a famous singer, after this group called Sparkle Sisters, all right, and then 3 sisters, all right. That was her favorite group, and she emulated them, wanted to be like them, and that was her dream. So she worked hard. She actually became a very famous singer, not only gospel singer, a singer, worth $450 million US. But in the end, that dream becomes a nightmare, because along with that dream came drug addiction. And she died one night in a bathtub, totally from a drug overdose, emaciated, addicted, in anguish and pain. In fact, her own daughter was also addicted with the same thing. Dreams can be held by the palm of God if it's aligned with the purposes of God, or dreams can become nightmares. And in Jacob's life, the dream becomes a reality. It becomes a blessing for the whole world. In Whitney Houston's, it has become a nightmare. May we dream the dreams that God puts into our hearts that are aligned with His calling for us to be His people, His light among the nations. May God add a blessing to His word.